Everyone assumed Delia Marsh had stolen the money. 3 days before the most closely watched merger in Montreal's criminal underworld, Callaway Vance's bookkeeper vanished without a word, and $500,000 in untracked transfers vanished with her. His lieutenants demanded blood. His lawyers demanded answers. His fiancée, Renata, called it predictable. "Women like her always have a price," she said, smoothing her gloves in the doorway of his office. "You just never asked what it was." But Callaway couldn't silence the part of him that refused to believe it, because in 4 years, Delia Marsh had never once been wrong about a number, and the transfers she had allegedly stolen didn't add up. He drove to her apartment alone. Delia had worked for Callaway Vance for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She knew this not because she counted, but because people like Delia remembered things whether they wanted to or not. She remembered the date of every wire transfer, the name on every shell company, the discrepancy of every invoice that crossed her desk at 3 in the morning. She remembered the passwords to accounts that hadn't been touched in years, and she remembered the names of the men who controlled them. Names that most people in Callaway's organization pretended not to know. To the outside world, she barely registered. She was the bookkeeper, the quiet one, the plus-size woman who arrived before sunrise and left after midnight, who wore sensible sweaters and kept her reading glasses on a string around her neck, like someone's grandmother. Visitors to Callaway's private offices in Old Montreal would glance past her desk without slowing down. She had learned to expect that. She had learned, in fact, to use it. What she never learned was how to ask for help. On a Tuesday morning in late November, Callaway's right-hand man, a careful and deliberate man named Shepard, placed a tablet on the corner of the mahogany desk without a word. Callaway looked up from a shipping manifest that hadn't made sense since the previous Thursday. "She's gone," Shepard said. Callaway set down his pen. "Gone since Saturday. Phone disconnected. She didn't come in Monday. No notice, no message, nothing left at her desk except a half-finished mug of tea." Callaway looked at the window. November rain made the old glass look like watercolor. Outside, the St. Lawrence moved grey and cold beneath the bridges. "That's not like her." "No," Shepard said. "It isn't." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Shepard added the part he had been holding back. "The Ledger B accounts show a transfer. 540,000 moved through 3 subsidiaries in 48 hours. The trail ends in the Caymans." He paused. "It started the same night she disappeared." The timing was everything. By the time Callaway walked the length of the corridor and back, the story had already written itself in everyone else's mind. The bookkeeper had been skimming. She had been waiting. She had chosen the worst possible moment, 72 hours before the Aldermean Group merger finalized, to take what she believed she was owed and disappear. His lawyer presented the theory with practiced calm. His head of security offered 2 names for retrieval. Even the caterers, arranging enormous white lilies in the lobby for the pre-merger reception, had apparently heard something. Renata Aldermain heard it over breakfast. She arrived at Callaway's office before noon, in a cream-colored coat and the kind of unhurried certainty that came from never having been wrong in public. She was 38 and beautiful in a way that photographed extremely well. The engagement had been announced 4 months ago, positioned as a joining of 2 powerful families, the Vance Shipping Network and the Aldermean Financial Holdings. On paper, it was an alliance of remarkable symmetry. "I told you about her," Renata said, setting her bag on the chair across from his desk. Callaway looked at her. "You told me what exactly?" "That she watched too carefully. That she was too interested in things that weren't her department." Renata tilted her head. "Quiet people are almost always collecting something." Callaway didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Ledger B and about a conversation he'd had with Delia 8 months ago in this same office when she had flagged an anomaly in the Aldermean preliminary accounts and asked, very carefully, whether he had authorized a particular transfer code. He had told her he'd look into it. He hadn't. Where did she live? He asked. Shepard, when Renata had left to attend to something on her phone. Shepard told him. Calloway drove himself. The building was on a street in Verdun that had been on the verge of renovation for at least a decade without ever quite getting there. The exterior brickwork was original and crumbling. The intercom panel had 4 buttons, one of which was held in place with electrical tape. Calloway stood in front of it in a coat that cost more than the monthly rent on every unit in the building combined, and something cold and specific moved through him. He paid Delia well. He knew this because he had approved the salary himself 4 years ago and increased it twice. She earned enough to live comfortably almost anywhere in the city. She lived here. He pressed the button for Unit 3B. No answer. He pressed it again. Silence. He tried the main door. The lock gave with minimal persuasion. The mechanism was 40 years old and hadn't been serviced in at least 10. The stairwell smelled of old concrete and heating oil. On the 2nd floor, someone was cooking something with bay leaves. On the 3rd floor, nothing, just the sound of pipes and a window at the end of the hall rattling in the November wind. Unit 3B. He knocked. Delia. Nothing. He pressed the back of his hand against the door, a habit he'd developed in a different chapter of his life. The surface was cool, but not uniformly. He knocked again, harder this time. Delia. It's Vance. A sound faint, but there a shallow, uneven exhale from somewhere inside, like someone surfacing from a depth. Then nothing. He didn't hesitate. He stepped back and applied enough force to the door that the aging frame gave at once, splinters catching in the brass fixture as the door swung inward. The apartment was almost empty in the way that hurt to look at. A second-hand sofa. A folding table covered in color-coded files. A corkboard above it dense with red string and printed photographs, some of which Calloway recognized and some of which he didn't. No television. A plant on the windowsill that had been watered recently, the soil still damp, which meant she hadn't planned to leave for long. Or she hadn't planned to leave at all. A thin line of dark brown crossed the laminate floor toward the bathroom. Calloway's hand moved to the inside of his coat before he registered what he was seeing. He crossed the apartment in 5 steps. The bathroom door was half open. Delia Marsh was on the floor between the tub and the wall, knees drawn in, one hand pressed against her left side where a dark stain had spread through her cardigan and dried at the edges. In her other hand, clenched tight enough that her knuckles had gone white against her brown skin, was a USB drive. She was alive. He could see the shallow rise and fall of her ribs. Calloway knelt beside her. Delia. Her eyes opened slowly. They were unfocused for a moment, moving across the ceiling before they found his face. Whatever she had been expecting, it wasn't him. He could see that clearly. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the specific loosening of someone who has been holding a very heavy thing alone for too long. "You came yourself," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "I should have come sooner." He meant it in more ways than one. She tried to speak again. He stopped her gently. "I've got you. Don't the drive." Her fingers tightened. "Don't let it out of your sight. I've got it. Promise me. I promise." She let go. He took the drive and slipped it into his inside pocket. Then he looked at her properly for the first time. The bruising on her jaw, the cuts along her forearm, the way she held herself like someone who had already catalogued every pain and set it aside to deal with later. This wasn't a robbery. This was an interrogation. Someone had come looking for what was in her hand, and she hadn't given it to them. The bathroom was freezing. The heating vent was taped shut with duct tape, and the single window above the tub had a crack running from the lower frame to the latch that let in a thread of November air. On the back of the toilet sat a collection of prescription bottles, several of which had expiry dates from the previous spring. Calloway looked at the bottles. Then he looked at the kitchen through the open door. The nearly bare counter, the single pot on the stove, the grocery list held to the refrigerator with a magnet from a dental office. Milk, bread, painkiller. The list had been written and rewritten, certain items crossed off and added back. In 4 years, he had never once wondered how she lived. Delia, he kept his voice steady. Who did this? She swallowed. The effort of it was visible. Someone who needed to know what I knew, and do they? No. He almost said something, but stopped himself. Instead, he reached for the single clean towel on the rack and pressed it carefully against the wound at her side. We're leaving, he said. They'll be watching. I know. You don't understand the full. Tell me in the car. She looked at him for a long moment. The merger, she said. The Aldermean accounts. I found transfers. Each word cost her something. 8 months of payments. Routed through your subsidiary codes. Codes that were issued under your name, but never authorized by you. Someone inside your organization has been signing off on transactions to 3 offshore accounts. She closed her eyes briefly, then forced them open. The money in Ledger B, the 540,000, it wasn't me. It was moved to look like me. Calloway was very still. The merger agreement, Delia continued. There are clauses buried in the supplementary annexes. I found them 6 weeks ago. If the merger closes and you sign the final transfer authority, she stopped. A cough moved through her like something being torn. Delia, you need to read the clauses. She turned her head slightly. I copied everything. It's all on the drive. Her voice dropped. I went to 2 people I thought I could trust, and within 12 hours, someone was in my apartment. Calloway looked at the drive in his pocket. Then he looked at her. My filing cabinet, she said. At the office, bottom drawer behind the insurance folders. There's a second copy. I'll send Shepard, not Shepard. The certainty in her voice was absolute and immediate. Calloway went very quiet. Say that again. I'm not saying it's him. I'm saying I don't know who it is. And until you know, you can't trust anyone connected to the Montreal office. She met his eyes. You can trust me. You can trust whoever you'd trust with your life before any of this started, that's all. He lifted her as carefully as he could manage. She was lighter than he expected, which told him something he didn't want to think about directly. He carried her through the apartment and noticed, on the way out, the corkboard again, and recognized the photographs for what they were. 8 months of documentation, printed bank records, annotated in her meticulous hand. Surveillance photographs taken from a street-level angle, the kind you could get from a phone if you sat in a cafe long enough. 2 faces he recognized. One he didn't, but he would. Outside, he laid her across the back seat of his car with the kind of care he generally reserved for things that couldn't be replaced. There's a doctor, he said. Retired. Not connected to the organization. Okay. You'll be all right. She didn't answer. She was already losing consciousness again. He called ahead as he drove. In the rear-view mirror, the street behind him was empty. He didn't trust that. By the following morning, 4 people knew Delia Marsh was alive. Calloway, the retired physician named Dr. Fournier, and 2 men Calloway had known since before the organization existed. Everyone else, including Renata Alderman, believed the bookkeeper was either in the Caymans or at the bottom of the St. Lawrence. Calloway intended to let them keep believing it. Dr. Fournier finished her assessment in the small hours of the morning and found Calloway standing at the window of the room where Delia slept. The blade missed anything vital, Fournier said in the flat tone of someone reporting a close margin. Centimeters. She'll need rest, antibiotics, and someone to make sure she actually eats something. She's significantly underweight for her frame. Calloway looked at her. She's not. She's always been. Her muscle mass indicates she's been skipping meals consistently for at least several months, possibly longer. Fournier set her bag down. She's been running herself into the ground, and the body doesn't absorb that kind of debt indefinitely. Calloway said nothing for a moment. He thought about the grocery list. Painkiller, the crossed-out items, the expired medications. He approved the bonuses. He signed the salary increases. He had assumed, because he had been told she was comfortable, that she was comfortable. He had never checked. He had never asked. By early afternoon, Delia was sitting upright against pillows in the safe house's second bedroom, pale and slower than usual, but with eyes that missed nothing. She refused the offer to wait until tomorrow. She asked for the drive and a laptop. When Calloway set both on the blanket beside her, she looked at him steadily. "Lock the door." He did. She opened the drive without fanfare. She didn't explain each file as she opened it. She simply opened them and let him read. He stood beside the bed and read for 40 minutes without speaking. The first file was the transfer records, 8 months of outgoing payments, each under the reporting threshold, each routed through subsidiaries that belonged to Calloway's network on paper, but had been quietly restructured through a series of amendments he had never seen. Each amendment bore an authorization code, his digital signature, extracted and reapplied to documents he had never signed. The second file was the merger annexes. Delia had color-coded them. The relevant clauses were highlighted in red. He read them twice. Then he sat down on the edge of the chair beside the bed and looked at the wall for a long time. The merger, as written, was not a partnership. It was a transfer. Once Calloway signed the final authority document at the closing ceremony, scheduled for the rooftop terrace of the Aldermene Tower, in front of 200 guests, 68% of the Vance shipping and logistics network would pass to Aldermene Group within 90 days, triggered by clauses that appeared on the surface to be standard liability provisions. His legal team had reviewed the document. His accountants had signed off. No one had read it the way Delia had read it, with the specific suspicion of someone who already believed something was wrong. There was a third file. It was a personnel record, not from within the organization, from outside it, older, predating Calloway's ascent to leadership. A name he recognized because it belonged to someone who had helped him build the network when it was still fragile, who had stood beside him at critical moments, who had, it now appeared, maintained a separate relationship with the Aldermene family for nearly a decade. The name was Shepard. Calloway closed his eyes. Delia said nothing. She waited. "How long have you known?" he asked. 6 weeks. I flagged it in a report I left on your desk." He remembered the report. He had set it aside to read on a Friday afternoon and had been pulled into a different meeting before he got to it. It had been on the stack that Shepard cleared at the end of the week. Of course it had. "I went to Shepard first," Delia said, her voice very quiet. "I thought he could help me verify the authorization codes. Within 12 hours, someone was in my apartment." Calloway looked at her. "I don't believe he gave the order himself," she said carefully. "But he told someone. And that someone gave the order. Renata. The payments route back to 2 accounts registered to a numbered company incorporated in the British Virgin Islands 14 months ago." She turned the laptop screen toward him. "The sole director is a law firm, but the beneficial owner, buried 3 layers in, is a person named in the Aldermene Group's internal compliance records as a family advisor." She paused. "Her maiden name is Aldermene." The room was very quiet. Calloway looked at the laptop screen for a long time. "She needed me to sign the closing documents. She needed you alive until then." "Yes, and after." Delia's expression didn't change. "There's a 4th file." He opened it. It was a contract of services. Security personnel, temporary placement, date specific. The engagement period covered a 72-hour window, beginning at the closing ceremony. The client was the same numbered company. The services rendered were described in language that, in context, left nothing to interpretation. Calloway set the laptop down. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a while. "The closing ceremony is in 31 hours, he said. "Yes, and Shepard believes the operation is still running, as far as I can tell." He turned around. "Then we don't cancel it." Delia looked at him. You want to let it proceed. I want them comfortable. He reached for his phone. Comfortable people are careless. He stopped before dialing. The filing cabinet. You said there's a second copy. Bottom drawer, behind the insurance folders. She paused. There's also a sealed envelope taped to the back of the drawer. It contains photographs and a full printed summary. I prepared it in case something happened to you. Yes, he held her gaze for a moment. Nothing else will happen to you, he said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a statement of intent, delivered in the tone he used when he intended to be taken literally. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, but she did. Over the next 30 hours, Calloway moved with a precision that would have been invisible to anyone not paying close attention. The closing ceremony remained on the schedule. The catering was confirmed. The guest list, 200 people representing financial, legal, political, and in some cases, extrajudicial authority across the province, was unchanged. Renata Aldermain's office sent a floral arrangement to the Vance headquarters that morning. It was enormous and white. Shepard went about his work as usual. Calloway let him. What Shepard didn't know, the security detail for the rooftop ceremony had been replaced, one by one, over the previous 12 hours by men who owed nothing to anyone connected to the Aldermain family. The audio recording equipment in the ceremony's main staging area had been supplemented. The closing documents had been reprinted, with certain clauses revised and certain annexes removed. The revised versions were identical in appearance to the originals, differentiated only by what was not there. And a sealed evidence package was in the hands of a journalist Calloway trusted, not to publish, but to hold. If anything happened to Calloway before the evening ended, the package would be delivered simultaneously to the RCMP, the Financial Crimes Unit of the Sûreté du Québec, and 3 newspapers. This arrangement had been made through Delia, who had the journalist's direct line memorized. Calloway hadn't known that either. He arrived at the Aldermain Tower rooftop at 7 in the evening. The city stretched out below in all directions, the river black and silver beyond the bridges, the mountain dark against the sky. The space was beautifully arranged, linen-draped tables, candlelight, winter flowers, the kind of care applied only to events at which the outcome has been assumed in advance. Renata was already there. She looked exceptional. She always looked exceptional. She crossed the room toward him with the easy confidence of a woman walking toward the conclusion of a plan she had spent 14 months executing. You look tired, she said. I'm fine. She touched his arm. After tonight, we can rest. The lawyers say the documents are ready. 15 minutes of signatures and it's done. She smiled, and the smile was warm and certain and utterly without hesitation. Everything we've worked toward. Calloway looked at her steadily. Almost, he said. The ceremony began at 8. 200 people arranged in careful tiers around the central stage. The financial press had sent photographers. The ceremony had the quality of something that had been choreographed from the beginning, which Calloway now understood it had been. When the moment came, the Aldermain Group's chief legal officer presented the closing documents and invited Calloway to step forward. Shepard stood at his right shoulder, as he had at every significant moment for 12 years. Renata waited at the table's edge with a calm that bordered on serene. Calloway stepped forward. He picked up the pen. He set it down. The room noticed. Conversations faltered. The legal officer glanced at Renata. Calloway turned to face the room. Before I sign anything tonight, he said, and his voice carried without effort through the terrace, I'd like to introduce you to the person who made the most significant contribution to this organization over the past 4 years. He looked toward the far doors. Shepard followed his gaze. His expression shifted for just a fraction of a second before he controlled it. Delia Marsh walked onto the rooftop. She moved carefully, one hand resting on the arm of Dr. Fournier, who had agreed to accompany her on the condition that she sat down the moment she felt faint. She wore a dark green wool dress and had her reading glasses on their usual string. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman recovering from something serious, who was upright through sheer stubbornness. Every conversation on the terrace stopped. She walked to the central table and set down a folder. "My name is Delia Marsh," she said. Her voice was calm and precise. "I am, or was until recently, the head bookkeeper for Callaway Vance's organization. I've been at that desk for 4 years. Most of you have walked past me without stopping." She glanced toward the folder. That was, as it turns out, a significant oversight on your part. She opened the folder. Callaway's team connected a presentation feed. Screens around the terrace came alive with the documents, the hidden annexes, the transfer records, the authorization codes, the offshore accounts, the personnel file, the security services contract. The room was very quiet. Renata moved first. She walked quickly toward the table, her composure intact, her voice low and flat. "This is fabricated. The source files are time-stamped," Delia said. "The authorization codes are traceable. The numbered company in the BVI was incorporated 14 months ago, 3 months before the merger negotiations were publicly announced." She turned a page. "And the audio from this room for the last 40 minutes has been transmitted to 3 separate locations." Renata stopped moving. "There are copies," Delia added, "of everything, including some things I didn't put in the presentation because I wanted to be considerate of the fact that we're at a party." A small number of people laughed. Delia did not. Shepard had gone very still at the edge of the group. He looked at Callaway. Callaway looked back. 12 years, he said. That was all. Shepard lowered his head. The room broke open then, people moving away from the aldermane table, voices rising, the legal officer backing toward the far doors. The photographer from the financial press was shooting continuously and would later describe it as the strangest assignment of her career. Renata turned to Callaway with an expression that had finally dropped the warmth. Underneath it was something cooler and harder and more honest. "You would take her word over mine?" "I would take evidence over assumptions," Callaway said. "I learned the difference recently." He picked up the closing documents. "The merger is over." He tore the documents in half. The sound was very small on a rooftop with 200 people on it, but everyone heard it. Federal financial investigators arrived 12 minutes later. Callaway had arranged the timing carefully. The lead officer held warrants for Renata Aldermain and 2 members of her legal team. Shepard was taken separately, in the stairwell, by 2 of Callaway's own men, who had instructions to treat him correctly. That distinction mattered to Callaway, even now. Maybe especially now. Delia was seated at a corner table by the time it was over, Fournier beside her, with a look that said she had about 30 more minutes before she needed to be horizontal. A glass of water sat in front of her, untouched. She was watching the room with the particular steadiness of someone who has been watching rooms carefully for years, and is finally watching one that is doing what she expected it to do. Callaway sat down across from her. "You should have been on a plane," he said, "not walking onto a rooftop." "I was going to send you in with the folder," she said. "But I thought it would be more convincing if I nearly gave Dr. Fournier a cardiac episode. She seems fine. She texted me twice on your way up the elevator." A pause, then, very quietly, Delia laughed. It was a real laugh, not the careful, minimal smile she had used for 4 years when someone said something mildly amusing in a meeting. It was involuntary and a little tired and completely unguarded, and it lasted only a few seconds before she caught it too late. Callaway looked at her. In 4 years, he did not think he had ever heard it before. Later that week, after the press had cycled through its initial frenzy, and the legal proceedings had entered the long, grinding phase in which lawyers earn their fees, Callaway called a meeting of the full executive council. The room was different without Shepard's chair occupied. Several people kept looking at it. Callaway didn't look at it. He had one item on the agenda. He covered it briefly and without theatrics. Delia Marsh was being appointed Director of Financial Oversight and Strategic Analysis, effective immediately, with full council standing. Her recommendations on any significant financial decision would require acknowledgement from at least 2 council members before action. Her office would be relocated from the outer corridor to the inner suite. One of the older council members started to say something, and then appeared to think better of it. No one objected. After the meeting, Calloway found Delia standing in the doorway of the new office, which was much larger than her previous one, and had a window that looked out over the river. She was holding a single folder, which she appeared to be using as a reason to stand in the doorway rather than enter. "It's too big," she said. "You'll adjust. I don't need all this. Delia." She stopped. "You catalogued 8 months of financial fraud from a desk in a hallway," he said. "You did it while running the full accounts of a criminal network, and apparently also not sleeping, and not eating enough, and not telling anyone you were in danger until someone put a knife in you." He paused. "You are allowed to have a window." She looked at the window for a long moment. Then she walked in. They had taken to having coffee together in the late afternoon, when the day's most urgent business had resolved itself, and before the evening's demands began. It had started practically. He needed to brief her on the full scope of the legacy accounts, and she needed access to the archive files. But it had become, without either of them formally deciding so, simply a part of the day. On a Thursday in December, the river below the window was beginning to freeze at the edges. The city was putting up lights. Delia sat across from him, with a coffee she had not yet touched, and an expression he had come to recognize as the one she wore when she was about to say something she had been carrying for a while. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. Why didn't you believe I'd stolen it?" He considered the question. He had thought about it himself in the weeks since, trying to identify the moment when conviction had formed, because it had been a conviction, not a doubt, from very early on. "You never made a mistake with a number," he said finally, "in 4 years. Not one, and the transfers had a mistake in them, a small one, buried in the 3rd subsidiary routing, a repeated digit that would have been invisible to almost anyone." He set his coffee down. "But not to you. I sat with that for a while before I drove to Verdun." Delia was quiet. "You would never have left a mistake in your own work," he said. "You just wouldn't." She looked down at the table. Something moved across her face that she did not immediately put away. "No one has ever said that to me," she said. "That you're too careful to make errors? That they noticed." The river moved below the window. A cargo ship was making slow progress through the grey water toward the harbour, lights beginning to appear along its hull as the afternoon darkened. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked up. "For the apartment." He held her gaze. "I pay you well. I've known that for 4 years, and I never once considered that you might be sending most of it somewhere else, or that you might need help with something that had nothing to do with work. I never asked." He paused. "I won't make that mistake again." Delia was still for a moment. "My mother's care is expensive," she said, matter-of-factly. "I didn't want anyone in the organization to know I had a vulnerability." "I understand that. I should have told you. I should have asked." He picked up his coffee. "Both things can be true." She looked at the river for a while. Then she said, "The day I started, you told me the position required absolute discretion. You said information was the most valuable thing in the building, and you needed someone who understood that completely." She paused. "I've thought about that a lot over the years. I think I understood it differently than you meant it." "How so?" "I thought you meant I wasn't supposed to talk, that the job was to know everything and say nothing and be invisible." She glanced at him. "I got very good at that part." "You did, too good." He didn't disagree. "Outside, that is doing what December light does in Montreal, fading early, turning the river copper and then grey, making the lights along the far shore look like something from a different city than the one you were in during the day. I hired a bookkeeper 4 years ago, Calloway said. Eventually, Delia waited. I didn't know, at the time, that I was hiring the person who would keep the whole thing from falling apart. He looked at her directly. I'd like to ask that person to stop being invisible. Not because I need her to be visible, because she's earned the right to stop hiding. Delia set down her coffee cup very carefully, which was what she did when she needed a moment. I'm not sure I know how, she said. I know. It's been a long time. I know that too. The city settled into evening around them. The lights came on along the bridge. A new shift of cargo moved on the river, steady and unhurried. In the outer office, the last of the day staff was shutting down their computers, pulling on coats, heading out into the December cold. In the inner suite, Delia Marsh sat across from the most dangerous man in Montreal and allowed herself, for the first time in years, to simply be seen. She didn't disappear, and for the first time since she had taken the job 4 years ago, the job she had taken because she was good at being invisible, because she had learned that invisible people were safe people, that the world moved around them without touching them. She found that being seen did not feel like what she had always feared it would. It felt like enough.